Chapter 2: The English Revolution, 1640 to 1660. The forces of evil realized that in order to win undisputed control of the material assets of the world and establish an atheistic, materialistic, totalitarian dictatorship, it is necessary to destroy all forms of constitutional governments and organized religion. In order to do this, the forces of evil decided they must divide the peoples of the world against each other on various issues. Dating back into antiquity, the Aryan race and Semitic races were driven into enmity against each other to serve the secret ambitions of the atheistic, materialistic leaders. Had the people of the and Semitic races remained steadfast to their belief in God and faithful to his commandments, the forces of evil would never have accomplished their evil purpose. The term Aryan race actually denotates the lingual groups otherwise known as the Indo-European or Indo-Germanic. It comprises two groups, the Western or European and the Eastern or Armenian. The Aryan language shows a common origin by their vocabulary system and inflections. Actually, the word Ar- Arani- Aryan means an honorable lord of the soul. And thus, this is what most leaders of the Aryan group in Europe were landed barons who maintained strong armed forces to protect their properties. From amongst these barons came the Aryan, the Aryan warlords. They in turn organized Nazism and used fascism and all anti-Semitic groups rights of center to serve their purpose and further their secret plans for world domination. The chief divisions of the Aryan groups are the Teutonic and Romanic and the Slavic races who settled in Western Europe. The Turks and Magyars, the Basques and the Finns are non-Aryan Ar- Aryan races. The common ancestors of the Aryan groups dwelt among the Pamirs at a period of remote antiquity. On the other hand, the Semitic Semitic groups are actually divided into two sections. One includes the Assyrian, the Aramean, the Hebrew, and Phoenician groups. The other section includes the Arabic and the Ethiopian groups. The Arabic is the most copious group, and the Armenian the poorest. The Hebrews occupy an intermediate position. Today, the term Jews is used very loosely, to define the people who have at one time or another embraced the Jewish faith. Many of these are not actually Semitic or racial origin, racial origin. A great number of people who accept the Jewish faith or descendants of the Herodians who are Idumeans of Turkish Mongol blood. They are actually Edomites. The important fact to remember is that among the Jewish leaders, in exactly the same way as among the Aryan leaders, there always has been a small, hard core of men who have been and still are Illuminists and or atheists. They have given lip service to the Jewish or Christian religions to suit their own purpose, but they never believe in the existence of God. They are internationalists now. They give allegiance to no particular nation, although they have used, or on occasion, nationalism to further their causes. Their only concern is to gain greater economic and political power. The ultimate objective of these leaders is of both groups is identical. They are determined to win for themselves undisputed control of the wealth, natural resources, and manpower of the entire world. They intend to turn the world into the conception of a totalitarian, godless dictatorship. The non Semitic and the Turk-Finnish races infiltrated the Europe from Asia about the last century after the advent of Christ. They took the land routes north of the Caspian Sea. These people are referred to in history as the Khazars, the Khazars. They were a pagan people. They settled the Eastern Europe and established the more powerful Khazar kingdom. They expanded their domains by military conquest until by the end of the 8th century they occupied the greater portion of the European Eastern Europe, west of the Ural Mountains, and north of the Black Sea. The Khazars ultimately accepted Judaism as their religion in preference to Christianity or Mohammedanism. Synagogues and schools for teaching Judaism were built throughout their kingdom. At the peak of their powers, Khazars were collecting tribute from 25 conquering peoples. The greater Khazar kingdom flourished for almost 500 years. Then, towards the end of the 10th century, as the Cathars were defeated in battle by the Varang- Varangians, Russians, who swept down upon them from the north. The conquest of the Khazars has completed by the end of the 13th century. The revolutionary movement inspired by the Khazar Jews went on within the Russian Empire from the 13th century until the Red October Revolution of 1817. The conquest of the Cathars in the 13th century explains how so many people, now commonly referred as to Jews, remained within the Russian Empire. There is one other important fact which sheds light on the subject of the Aryan Aryanism, and Semitism. The Finns and the other groups generally classified as Varangians, Russians, were of non-Aryan origin, and the German people, generally speaking, have treated them as enemies. One act of Christ has a great deal of importance in the study of world revolutionary movements. Christ was considered by many a radical who based his reform movements on the worship of Almighty God, obedience to constituted authority, and love of one's neighbors. The story of the life of Christ shows that he loved all people except one particular group. He hated the moneylenders with an intensity that seemed strange in a man of so mild a character. Jesus repeatedly abolished the moneylenders for their practice of usury. He publicly denounced them as worshippers of Mammon. He said they were of the synagogue of Satan, Revelation 2:9. He emphatically oppressed his extreme hatred of the moneylenders when he took a whip and drove them out of his temple. He abolished in them in these words: "This temple was built as the house of God, but you have turned it into the den of thieves." By performing this act of vengeance on the moneylenders, Christ signaled to his own Death warrant. It was the Illuminati, the false priests and elders in their pay, who hatched the plot by which Christ would be executed by the Roman soldiers. It was they who supplied the 30 pieces of silver used to bribe Judah. It was they who used their propagandists to misinform and mislead the mob. It was the agents of the Illuminati who led the mob. Then they accepted Barabbas and screamed that Christ be crucified. It was the Illuminati who arranged matters so that the Roman soldiers acted as their executioners. Then, after the foul deed had been done, and they had their revenge, the conspirators stepped into the background and let their guilt rest on the masses of the Jews and the hidden and their children. History proves they had a fiendish reason for putting the guilt of the death of Christ on the Jewish people. History proves that they intended to use the hate engendered amongst the Jewish people as a result of persecution to serve their vile purposes and further their secret totalitarian ambitions. Christ knew all these things. He made his knowledge known in the most dramatic manner possible. As he hung dying on the cross, he prayed to his heavenly Father, and he said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." Surely he was praying for the mob. He was asking for forgiveness for the men who had been used by the Illuminati to the instruments of their revenge. History proves the international moneylenders have been using the mob to further their secret ambitions ever since. In the Lenin Institute of Moscow, the professors who lecture to aspiring revolutionary leaders from all across the world invariably refer to the masses as the mob. The Illuminati direct all evil forces. The study of the World Revolutionary Movements, or WRM, from the time of Christ to the present day proves that it is unjust to blame the whole Jewish race for the crimes committed against humanity by a small group of false priests and moneylenders. These men always have been and still are the secret power behind internationalism. They use communism today as the manual of action to further their secret plans for ultimate world domination. Study of history will prove that it is equally unjust to blame the whole German and Italian people for the crimes against humanity committed by the small group of Aryan warlords who organized Nazism in the hope that they could defeat international communism and political Zionism to give them world domination by military conquest. History proves clearly that the leaders of the two opposing groups have divided the masses of the people, regardless of race, color, or creed, into two opposing camps, and then used them all as pawns in the game of international chess. They play to decide which group will ultimately defeat the other and establish once and for all undisputed control over the world, its wealth, its natural resources, its manpower, and its religion. It must be reimbursed that as the purpose of the devil is to win men's souls away from God, Satan uses both red and communism and black Nazism to influence the minds of men so that they will embrace either atheistic ideologies. Those who accept the atheistic ideology sell their souls to the devil. Historical events prove the continuity of the evil purposes of the Illuminati. Many theologians agree that this perfect continuity of the long range plans is positive evidence that they are, as Christ named them, the synagogue of Satan. Theologians base their opinion on the theory that nothing human could have such a continuing record of evil down through the ages of time. The continuity of evil is the exact opposite of the apostolic succession of the Roman Catholic Church. In this, as in many other things, we are forcibly reminded of the actual power of the supernatural forces to influence our individual lives, national policy, and international affairs. Arguments of this kind regarding evil minded Jews are equally applicable to minded Aryans and evil minded men of all races, color, and creeds. History proves that Seneca, 4 BC to 65 AD, died because he, like Christ, tried to expose the corrupt practices of the evil influence of the moneylenders who had infiltrated into the Roman Empire. Seneca was a famous Roman philosopher. He was chosen to Nero, who became emperor of Rome. For a long time, Seneca was Nero's best friend and most trusted advisor. Nero married Pompeia, who brought him under the evil influence of the moneylenders. Nero became one of the most infamous rulers the world had ever known. His licentious conduct and depraved habits developed in him a character so base that he lived only to persecute and destroy everything that was good. His acts of revenge took the form of atrocities usually committed in public upon the victims of his wrath. Seneca lost his influence over Nero, but he never stopped publicly denouncing the moneylenders for their evil influence and corrupt practices. Finally, the moneylenders demanded that Nero take action against Seneca, who was very popular with the people so as not to arouse the wrath of the people against him, and the moneylenders. Nero ordered Seneca to end his own life. It is the first recorded case in which the moneylenders made a person commit suicide because he had become troublesome to them, but it was by no means the last. History records dozens of similar suicides and murders which were made to appear as accidents or suicides. One of the most notorious and recent events was that of James V. Forrestal in 1945. Forrestal had been convinced that the American bankers were closely affiliated with the international bankers who controlled the Bank of England, France, and other countries. He was also convinced, according to these diaries, that the international money barons were the Illuminati and directly responsible for the outbreak of World War I and II. He tried to convince President Roosevelt and the top level government officials of the truth. Either he failed and committed suicide in a fit of depression, or he was murdered to shut his mouth forever. Murder had made to appear like suicide has been attempted in policy in the top levels of international integrity for many centuries. Justinian I, Flavius Ancius Justinarius, 483 to 565 AD, wrote his famous book of law, Corpus Juris Civilis. He tried to put an end to the illegal method of trafficking in trade indulged in by certain Jewish merchants. By engaging in illegal trade and wholesale smuggling, the Jewish merchants, who were only agents of the Illuminati, obtained unfair advantage over their entire competitors. They put themselves out of business. The book of law written by Justinian was accepted as the textbook of law right down to the 10th century. Even today, it is considered the most important of all documents of jurisprudence. But the moneylenders were able to offset the Justinian tried to do. Junk and Wagnall's Jewish Encyclopedia has this to say about the Jews in those days. They enjoyed full religious liberty. Minor offices were open to them. The trade in Slavs constituted the main source of livelihood for the Roman Jews, and decrees against the traffic were issued in 3035, 3036, 3039, 384 AD, etc. There is the story in black and white, but history reveals that the Jewish merchants and moneylenders did not confine their illegal activities to the Slav trade. It is recorded that they engaged in every form of illegal trafficking, including the drug trade, prostitution, wholesale smuggling of liquors, perfumes, jewels, and other dutiable goods. In order to protect their illegal trade and traffic, they bribed and corrupted officials. By use of drugs and liquor and women, they destroyed the morals of the people. History records that Justinian, although emperor of the Roman Empire, wasn't strong enough to put the stop to their activities. Edward Gibbon, 1737 to 1794, deals with the corruption influence of the Jewish merchants and many lenders. He credits them with contributing greatly to the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. He wrote in the book and with the title Gibbon, with that title, Gibbon gives considerable space to the part Pompeia, Nero's wife, played in bringing about the conditions which started that the people of Rome reeling drunkenly towards their own destruction. With the fall of the Roman Empire, Jewish predominance was established. The nations of Europe entered into what historians name the Dark Ages. The Encyclopedia Britannica has this to say on the subject. There was an inevitable tendency for them, the Jewish merchants and moneylenders, to specialize in commerce for which they acumen and ubiquity gave them special qualifications. In the Dark Ages, the commerce of Western Europe was largely in their hands, in particular the Slav trade. Jewish control of trade and commerce, both legal and illegal, grew tighter and tighter. It spread far and wide until every European country's economy was more or less in their hands. Evidence in the form of Polish and Hungarian coins bearing Jewish inscriptions gave some indication of the power they had exerted in the financial matters during those days. The fact that the Jews made a sort of special effort to issue and control currency supports the opinion that the moneylenders had adopted the slogan, "Let us issue and control the money of a nation, and we care not who makes its laws." Long before Amschel Meyer Bord 1743-1812, used the slogan to explain to his co-conspirators the reason the Jewish moneylenders had obtained control of the Bank of England in 1684. Barons who were leaders of Arianism determined they would break the Jewish control of trade, commerce, and money in Europe. It was with this purpose in the mind that in 10,095 they obtained the no 1095 they obtained the support of certain Christian rulers to start the Crusades or Holy Wars between 1085 and 1000 12,000 1271. 8 crusades were organized. Officially, the crusades were a military expedition undertaken to ensure the safety of pilgrims who wished to visit the holy sepulchre and set up a Christian rule in Palestine. In actual fact, they were wars fomented for the purpose of dividing the population of Europe into two camps: the camp pro-Jewish and the other anti-Jewish. The more recent years, the secret powers divided the white race into Semitic and anti-Semitic groups. Some of the Crusades were successful, some were not. The net result was that in 1271, Palestine still remained in the hand of the infidels, although the countries of Christendom had spent millions in money and treasure to finance the Crusades and sacrificing millions of lives fighting those holy wars. Strange to relate, the Jewish moneylenders grew richer and stronger than ever. There is one phase of the Crusades which must not be overlooked when the causes are being studied in relation to the effects they produced in later years. In 1215, the Roman Catholic hierarchy held the Fourth Lateran Council. The main topic under consideration was Jewish aggression in all countries of Europe. During this period of history, the rulers of the church and the rulers of the states worked in unity. The rulers of church, after due deliberation, expressed themselves in favor of continuing the Crusades. They also drew up and planned decrees designed to put an end to the usury and the Jewish moneylenders' practice of using unethical methods in traffic and trade to obtain unfair advantage over Gentile competitors, and to curb corrupt and immoral practices. To achieve this purpose, the dignitaries attending the Fourth Lateran Council decreed that in future the Jews be restricted to living in their own quarters. Jews were absolutely prohibited from hiring Christians as their employees. This decree was passed because Jewish moneylenders and merchants operated on the joint stock company principle. They employed Christians to act as the frontmen while they hid in the background directing operations. This was convenient because when anything went wrong, the Christian frontmen got the blame and the punishments while they got off scot-free. In addition, by the decrees, Jews were absolutely prohibited from employing Christian females in their homes and establishments. This decree was passed because evidence was produced to prove that young females were systematically seduced and then turned into prostitutes. Their masters used them to obtain control over influential officials. Other decrees made it unlawful for Jews to engage in many commercial activities, but even the power of the church, supported by most Christian officials of the state, could not make the money barons amenable to the laws. All the decrees accomplished was to intensify the hatred the Illuminati had for the Church of Christ, and they started a continuing campaign to separate the church from the state. To achieve this purpose, they introduced the idea of secularism in against the laity. In 1253, the French government ordered the Jews expelled because they had refused to obey the law. Most of the Jews who were expelled went over to England. By 1255, the Jewish moneylenders had obtained absolute control of many church dignitaries and most of the nobility. That the moneylenders, the rabbis, the elders belonged to the Illuminati was proved by evidence again during the investigation ordered by King Henry III into ritual slaying of St. Hugh of Lincoln in 1255. 18 Jews were proved to have been the culprits. They were tried, found guilty, and executed. In 1272, King Henry died. Edward I became King of England. He determined the Jewish leaders must give up the practice of usury. In 1275, he had Parliament pass statutes of Jewry. They were designed to curb the power of Jews. Usurers were exerting over the debtors, both Christians and fellow Jews. The statutes of Jewry were probably the first legislation in which the Commons in Parliament had an active part. They cannot be classified as anti-Semitic because they actually protected the interests of honest and law-abiding Jews. But as had happened so often before, the Jewish moneylenders thought that the power they could exert over both the church and the state would permit them to defy the king's decree in the same way they had set at naught those passed by the Lateran Council. They made a grave mistake. In 1290, King Edward issued another decree. All Jews were expelled from England. This was the start of what historians call the Great Eviction. After Edward I started the ball rolling, the crowned heads of Europe followed his example. In 1306, France expelled the Jews. In 1348, Saxony followed suit. In 1360, Hungary. In 1370, Belgium. In 1380, Slovakia. In 1420, Austria. In 1444, the Netherlands. In 1492, Spain. The expulsion of the Jews from Spain has special significance. It throws light on the Spanish Inquisition. Most people have the idea the Inquisition was instituted by Roman Catholics to persecute Protestants who had broken away from the church. As a matter of fact, the Inquisition was introduced by Pope Innocent III was a means of unmasking heretics and infidels who were masquerading as Christians for the purpose of destroying the Christian religion from within. It didn't make the slightest difference to the inquisitors, whether they accused a Jew or Gentile, black or white. The terrible ceremony of the auto da fe, or act of faith, was specially designed to be used in connection with the execution of all convicted heretics and infidels when Torquemada, 1420 to 1498, was Grand Inquisitor. It is these hidden incidents which reveal so much truth. It was in Spain during the 14th century that the Jew moneylenders first succeeded in having the loans they made the state secure by the right to collect the taxes levied upon the people. They used such cruelty when demanding their pound of flesh that it only required the inflammatory oratory of the priests Fernando Martinez to produce a mass action which ended in one of the bloodiest massacres recorded in history. Here again is the perfect example of how thousands of innocent Jews were victimized for the sins and crimes committed against humanity by just a few. In 1495, Lithuania expelled the Jews. In 1498, Portugal. In 1540, Italy. In 1551, Bavaria. It is important to remember that during the general eviction, certain wealthiest and influential Jews managed to obtain sanctuary in Bordeaux, Avignon, and certain papal states, Marseille, North Alsace, and southern parts of northern Italy. But as stated in the Encyclopedia Britannica, the masses of the Jewish people were thus to be found once more in the East and in the Polish and Turkish empires. The few communities suffered to remain in the Western Europe were meantime subjected to at to last to all the restrictions which earlier ages had usually allowed to remain as an ideal, so that in an sense the Jewish Dark Ages may be said to begin with the Renaissance. This admission would indicate there is some justification for the claim that many historians that not until the Western European nation wrested economic control from the Jewish money lenders did the rebirth of civilization occur. Following the Great Eviction, the Jews again resumed living in ghettos or kahals. Thus, isolated from the masses of the population, the Jews were under the direct control of the rabbis and elders, many of them who influenced by the Illuminati and the wealthy Jew moneylenders who remained in their various sanctuaries. In the ghettos, agents of the Illuminati inspired a spirit of hatred and revenge in the hearts of the Jewish people against those who had evicted them. The rabbis reminded them that as a chosen people of God, the day must come when they could have their revenge and inherit the earth. It would be mentioned that most Jews who settled in Eastern Europe were restricted to living within the Pale of settlements located on the western borders of Russia and extending to the shores of the Baltic Sea in the north and the shores of the Black Sea in the south. Most of them were Khazar Jews. The Khazar Jews were noted for their Yiddish culture, their rapacious practices in financial matters, and their lack of ethics in commercial transactions. They should not be confused with the biblical Hebrews, who are mild mannered and generally speaking pastoral people. Within the ghettos, an atmosphere of hatred and desire for revenge was developed by the agents of the the desire for revenge was developed by the agents of the Illuminati. They organized these negative conditions into the revolutionary movements based on terrorism. From its very inception, the international minded money barons and their high priests designed to finance and control the world revolutionary movements. They used it as the instrument by which they would obtain their revenge on Christian churches and the crowned heads of Europe. History proves how money barons developed their revolutionary movements into international communism as we know it today. They organized individual acts of terrorism into a disciplined revolutionary movements. They then planned systemic infiltration of the Jews back into the countries from which they had been expelled. Because their reentry was illegal, the only methods by which infiltration could be accomplished was to establish Jewish undergrounds. Because the Jews who infiltrated into the undergrounds of the European cities could not obtain lawful employments, they were supplied with funds with which to develop the black market system. They indulged in every kind of illegal traffic and trade, working on the principle of the joint stock co. The identity of the money barons who owned and controlled the vast underground system always remained a secret. Count de Ponsens, Mrs. Nesta Webster, Sir Walter Scott, and many other authors and historians have suspected that the Illuminati had a group of internationalists had and the group of internationalists were the secret power behind the world revolutionary movements. But it was not until recently that sufficient evidence was pieced together to prove that they were suspected was an actual fact. As the events of history are unrolled in their chronological sequence, it will be seen how the Illuminati used the Semitic groups and the Aryan rate groups to serve their purpose and involved millions upon millions of people in revolutions and wars to further their own secret, selfish ambitions. William Foss and Cecil Gerhardt, who wrote The Spanish Arena, said, "The question of who are the leading figures behind the attempt of the joint stock company domination of the world and how they obtain their ends is beyond the scope of this book, but it is one of the important liberals of liberal no, libers affair yet to be written. It will have to be written by a man of the highest courage who will count his life as nothing compared with enlightenment of the world as to what the satanic self-appointed priesthood would adorn." How successful the plan to infiltrate back into the countries from which they have been expelled to be best turned out to be turned out to be can be best judged by the following records. The Jews were back in England in 1600s, back in Hungary in 1500s. They were expelled again in 1582. They were back in Slovakia in 1562, but were expelled again in 1744. They were back in Lithuania in 1700, but regardless of how many times they were expelled, they always remained the Jewish underground from which the revolutionary activities of the secret powers were conducted. Because King Edward I of England had been the first to expel the Jews, the Jewish money barons in France, Holland, and Germany decided it would be poetic justice if they tried out their plan revolutionary technique in England first. They used the underground agents or cells to cause trouble between the king and his governments. Employers and labor, ruling class and workers, church and states, the plotters injected controversial issues into politics and religion to divide the people into two opposing camps. They first divided the people in England into Catholic and Protestants. They then divided the Protestant into conformists and nonconformists. When King Charles I was brought into disagreement with his parliament, a Jewish money baron in Holland named Manasseh ben Israel had his agents contact Oliver Cromwell. They offered him large sums of money if he would carry out the plan to overthrow the British throne. Manasseh ben Israel and other German and French moneylenders financed Cromwell. Ferdinand Carvajal of Portugal, often referred to in history as the Great Jew, became Cromwell's chief military contractor. He reorganized the Roundheads into a model army. He provided them with the best arms and equipment money could buy. Once the conspiracy was underway, hundreds of trained revolutionaries were smuggled into England and were absorbed into the Jewish undergrounds. The same thing goes to America in America today. The head of the Jewish underground in England at the time was a Jew named De Jesus. The great Jew, Fernandez Carvajal, had used his influence to have De Jesus appointed Portugal ambassador. It was in his house, protected by diplomatic immunity, that the leaders of the Jewish revolutionary underground remained hidden and worked out their plots and intrigue. Once the revolution had been decided upon, the Jewish plotters introduced Calvinism into England and split church and state and divided the people. Contrary to general belief, Calvinism is of Jewish origin. It was deliberately conceived to split the uh, adherents of Christian religions and divide the people. Calvin's real name was Cohen. When he went to Geneva to France to start preaching his doctrine, he became known as Cohen. In England, it became Calvin. History proves that there is hardly a revolutionary plot that wasn't hatched in Switzerland. There is hardly a Jewish revolutionary leader who hasn't changed his name. At the Benai birth celebrations in Paris, France in 1936, Calvin, or Calvin, whatever his name may have been, was enthusiastically acclaimed to have been of Jewish descent. In addition to the religious controversy, the revolutionary leaders organized armed mobs to abrogate every situation injected into politics and labor by their masters. Isaac Disraeli, 1766 to 1848, a Jew and father of Benjamin Disraeli, who afterwards became Lord Beaconsfield, deals with this angle of the British Revolutionary in a detail of his two-story volume, The Life of Charles II. He remarks that he obtained considerable information from the records of Melchior de Salem, a Jew who was a French envoy to the British government at a time. D'Israel draws attention to the great similarity or pattern of revolutionary activities which preceded both British and French revolutions. In other words, the handiwork of the secret and real directors of the World Revolutionary Movements, WRM, could hardly be seen in both, a fact which we will proceed to prove. The evidence which absolutely convicts Oliver Cromwell of participating in the Jewish revolutionary plot was obtained by George Alfred Douglas, who edited a weekly review, Plain English, published by the North British Publishing Company. In an article which appeared in an issue of September 3rd, 1921, he explained how his friend Mr. L.D. van Valkert of Amsterdam, Holland, had come into possession of a missing volume of records of the synagogue of Mulheim. This volume had been lost during the Napoleonic Wars. The volume contains record of letters written to and answered by directors of the synagogue. They are written in German. One entry dated June 16th, 1647 reads from OC, i.e. Oliver Cromwell, to An Pratt. In return for financial support, will advocate admission of Jews in England to England. This, however, impossible while Charles living. Charles cannot be executed without trial. Adequate grounds for which do not at present exist. Therefore, advise that Charles be assassinated, but will have nothing to do with the arrangements for procuring an assassination, though willing to help in his escape. In reply to his dispatch, the records show that E. Pratt wrote a letter dated to July 2nd, 1647, addressing to Cromwell. Will grant financial aid as soon as Charles removes, and Jews admitted. Assassination too dangerous. Charles should be given an opportunity to escape. His recapture will then make trial and execution possible. The support will be liberal, but useless to discuss terms until trial commences. On November 12th that same year, Charles was given the opportunity to escape. He was, of course, recaptured. Hollis and Ludlow, authorities on this chapter of history, are both on record as considering the flight as a stratagem of Cromwell. After Charles had been recaptured, events moved apace. Cromwell and the British Parliament purged of most members he knew were loyal to the king. Notwithstanding this drastic action, then the House sat all night on December 5th, 1648. The majority agreed that the concession offered by the king were satisfactory to a settlement. Any such settlement would have disqualified Cromwell from receiving the blood money promised him by the international money barons through their agent E. Pratt. So Cromwell struck again. He ordered Colonel Pride to purge Parliament of those members who had voted in favor of a settlement with the king, that when What that then happened is referred to in school history books as Pride's Purge. When the purge was finished, 50 members remains. They were recorded as the rump parliaments. They usurped absolute power. On January 9th, 1649, a High Court of Justice was proclaimed for the purpose of putting the King of England on trial. Two-thirds of members of the court were levelers of Cromwell's army. The conspirators couldn't find an English lawyer who wouldn't draw up a criminal charge against King Charles. Carvajal instructed an alien Jew, Isaac Dorisaslos, Manasseh ben Israel's agents in England, to draw up the indictment upon which King Charles was tied. Charles was found guilty of the charges leveled against him by the international Jewish moneylenders, not by the people of England. On January 30th, 1649, he was publicly beheaded in the front of the banqueting house at Whitehall, London. The Jewish moneylenders, directed by the high priestess of the synagogue of Satan, had had their revenge because Edward I had expelled the Jews from England. Oliver Cromwell received his blood money just as Judas had done. History proves that the international Jewish moneylenders had a purpose other than revenge for getting rid of Charles. They removed him to obtain control of England's economy and government. They planned to involve many European countries in war with England. Great sums of money were needed to fight wars. By loaning the crowned heads of Europe the money required to fight wars, they fomented the internationalists were enabled to rapidly increase national debts of all European nations. The chronological sequence of events from the execution of King Charles in 1649 to the institution of the Bank in England in 1694 shows how the national debt was increased. The international bankers used intrigue and cunning to throw Christians at each other's throats. 1649, Cromwell, financed by Jews, waged war on Ireland, captures Drogheda Drogheda and Wexford. British Protestants blamed for persecution of Irish Catholics. 1650, Montrose, in rebellion against Cromwell, captured and executed. 1651, Charles II invades England, defeated and flees back to France. England involved in a war with Dutch. 1652. 1653, Cromwell proclaims himself Lord Protector of England. 1654, England involved in more wars. 1656, trouble started in American colonies. 1657, death of Cromwell, son Richard named Protector. 1659, Richard, disgusted with intrigue, resigns. 1660, General Monk occupied London, Charles II proclaimed king. 1661, truth revealed regarding intrigue entered into by Cromwell and his coherent irritant and Bradshaw causes serious public reaction. Bodies are exhaled and hung from gallows on Tyburn Hill, London. 1662, religious strife is engendered to divide members of the Protestant denominations. Nonconformants to the established Church of England were persecuted. 1664, England is again involved in war with Holland. 1665, a Great Depression settles over England. Unemployment and shortages of food undermine the health of the people, and the Great Plague breaks out. 1666, England is involved in war with France and Holland. 1667, cabal agents start new religion and political strife. 1674, England and Holland make peace. The men directing international intrigue change their characters. They become matchmakers. They elevate plain Mr. William Stadtholder to the rank of the Captain General of the Dutch forces. He became William Prince of Orange. It was arranged that he meets Mary, the eldest daughter of the Duke of York. The Duke was only one. place removed from becoming King of England. 1677, Princess Mary of England married William Prince of Orange. To place William Prince of Orange upon the throne of England, it was necessary to get rid of both Charles II and the Duke of York, who was slated to become James II. 1683, the Rye House plot was hatched. The intention was to assassinate both Charles II and the Duke of York. It failed. 1685, Charles II died. The Duke of York became King James II of England. Immediately, a campaign of l'infamie was started against James II. The Duke of Monmouth was persuaded or bribed into leading an insurrection to overthrow the king. On June 30th, the Battle of Sedgemoor was fought. Monmouth was defeated and captured. He was executed July 15th. In August, Judge Jerry's opened what historians named the Bloody Assizes. Over 300 persons concerned in the Monmouth Rebellion were sentenced to death under circumstances of atrocious cruelty. Nearly 1,000 others were condemned to be sold as slaves. This was a typical example of how secret power working behind the scenes creates conditions for which for which other people are blamed. Others are aroused to take active opposition against those they blame. They in turn are liquidated. King James still had to be disposed of before William the Orange could be placed on the throne to carry out their mandates. Every person in England was bewitched and bewildered. They were not allowed to know the truth. They were bland, blamed everyone and everything except the secret powers who were pulling the strings. Then the conspirators made their next move. 1688, they ordered Prince William of Orange to land in England at Torbay. He did on November 5th. King James abdicated. He fled to France. He had become unpopular by reason of campaign of La Famille, intrigue of his own foolishness and culpability. 1689, William of Orange and Mary were proclaimed King and Queen of England. King James did not intend to give up the throne without a fight. He was a Catholic, so the secret powers sets up William of Orange and the champion of the Protestant faith. On February 15, 1689, King James landed in Ireland. The Battle of the Boyne was fought by men of definite and opposing religious convictions. The battle has been celebrated by Orange men on the 12th July ever since. There is probably not one Orangeman in 10,000 who knows that all the wars and rebellions fought from 1614 to 1689 were fomented by the international moneylenders for the purpose of letting themselves in position and to control British politics and economy. Their first objective was to obtain permission to institute a Bank of England and consolidate the hidden and secure the debts Britain owed them for loans made to her to fight the wars they instigated. History shows how they completed their plans. In the final alliances, none of the countries and people involved in the wars and revolutions obtained any lasting benefits. No permanent satisfactory solution was reached regarding the political, economic, and religious issues involved. The only people to benefit were a small group of moneylenders who financed the wars and revolutions, and their friends and agents who supplied the armies, the ships, and the munitions. It is important to remember that no sooner was the Dutch general sitting upon the throne of England than he persuaded the British Treasury to borrow 1,250,000 from Jewish bankers who had put him there. The School of History informs our children that the negotiations were conducted by Sir John Hublin and Mr. William Patterson on behalf of the British government with moneylenders whose identity remained secret. Search of historical documents reveals that in order to maintain complete secrecy, the negotiations regarding the terms of the loan were carry on in the church. In the days of Christ, the moneylenders used the temple. In the days of William the Orange, they scratched discredited the church. The international moneylenders agreed to accommodate the British treasury to the extent of £1,250,000, providing they could dictate their own terms and conditions. This was agreed to. The terms were in parts. 1. That the names of those who were made the loan remain secret, and that they must be granted a charter to establish the Bank of England. 2. That the directors of the Bank of England be granted the legal right to establish the gold standard for currency by which. 3. They could make loans to the value of £10 for every £1 value of gold they had on deposit in their vaults. 4. That they be permitted to consolidate the national debts and secure payments of amounts due as principal and interest by direct taxation of the people. Thus, the sum of £1.25 million King William of Orange sold to the people of England into economic bondage. The Jewish moneylenders gained their ambitions. They had usurped the power to issue and control the currency of the nation, and having secured that power, they cared not who made the laws. Just what the acceptance of the gold standard meant is best illustrated by citing a simple transaction. The directors of the Bank of England could loan £1,000 for every £100 worth of gold they had on deposit as security. They collected interest on the full £1,000 loan at 5 cents. This amounted to £50 a year. Therefore, at the end of the first year, the bankers collected back 50% of the amounts they had originally put up to secure the loan. If a private individual wished to obtain a loan, bankers made him put up security in the form of property, stocks, or bonds, much in excess of the value of the loan he required. If he failed to meet the payments of principal and interest, foreclosure proceedings were taken against his property, and money lenders obtained many times the value of the loan. The international bankers never intended that England be allowed to pay off the national indebtedness. The plan was to create international conditions which could plunge all nations concerned deeper and deeper into their debt. As far as England is concerned, in only 4 years, from 1694 to 1698, the national debt was increased from 1 to 16 million pounds sterling. This debt accumulated because of wars. It is interesting to note that John Churchill, 1650 to 1722, became the leading military figure during the period of English history. Because of his military genius and his service to Britain, he was created the first Duke of Marlborough. The secret power behind the world revolutionary movement, pulled the necessary strings and brought about the wars of the Spanish Succession. In 1701, the Duke of Marlborough was made commander-in-chief and armed of Holland, no less an authority than the Jewish Encyclopedia records the fact that for many of his services, the Duke of Marlborough received not less than £6,000 a year from the Dutch Jewish banker Solomon Medina. The events leading up to the French Revolution show how between 1689 and 1815 the national debt of Britain was increased to £885 million sterling. By 1845, the British national debt had reached an astronomical 22 billion 503 million 532,372 pounds. As an Irish economist remarked, only a Jewish controlled organization could insist on the odd pound.